The bell above old Samuel's trading post rang 3 times that afternoon, which meant a supply ship had landed near the edge of the colony. Nora Bennett heard it from her bedroom window and was out the door before her mother could remind her to finish her breakfast. Halden's Reach was a small mining colony built on red rock and thin air, held together by patched metal domes and people who refused to give up on it. The Bennett family had lived there for 6 years, ever since Nora's father, Daniel, came out to help build the colony's power grid and simply never left. Nora was 8 years old, small for her age, with a habit of staring at things longer than most people thought was polite. She stared at insects crawling along the dome walls, at the humming machines in her father's workshop, at strangers who passed through on supply runs. She was rarely afraid of anything, which worried her mother, Grace, more than she liked to admit. Grace worked as the colony's field medic, and she had seen enough accidents to know that fearlessness in a child was not always a gift. That morning, the colony felt ordinary. Farmers checked on their greenhouse crops, children ran between the narrow streets, and the low sun turned the dust in the air a soft orange color. Nobody in Halden's Reach knew they were being watched. Far above the planet, inside a Dominion warship shaped like a curved blade, Commander Vash stood in front of a wide viewing screen showing the small human settlement below. He was not a large alien, nor a particularly fierce-looking one, but his voice carried the kind of quiet certainty that made junior officers nervous. He had conquered 6 worlds in his career, and not one of them had required a full invasion. "Soldiers are expensive," Vash said to the officer beside him. "Fear is not." The Dominion had learned long ago that most species did not need to be defeated in battle. They needed to be convinced, in one terrifying night, that resistance was pointless. A single fright, delivered correctly, could save the Empire years of war and thousands of soldiers. Vash's plan for Halden's Reach did not involve troops at all. It involved something else entirely, something grown rather than built. 3 decks below, in a cold laboratory lit by pale blue light, Dr. Rin stood in front of a containment chamber. Inside it, curled in the dark, was a creature the size of a transport shuttle, with leathery wings folded against its back and scales the color of burnt iron. Its official designation was Unit 12. Everyone else simply called it the Dragon. Dr. Rin had spent 9 years shaping Unit 12 into what it was now. It had been grown from predator stock, its brain rewired through careful, repeated conditioning until it associated the sight of frightened, running prey with comfort and reward. It did not need orders to attack. It only needed fear to chase. Rin had built 4 earlier versions before this one. All of them had failed in different ways. Too aggressive, too unpredictable, too likely to kill instead of merely terrify. Unit 12 was supposed to be the perfected version, calm until triggered, then unstoppable until its target broke. But lately, Rin had noticed something odd in the readings. Small, strange spikes in Unit 12's neural activity whenever it was shown recordings of human children rather than human soldiers. Fear responses were supposed to look the same no matter the target. These did not. Rin made a note to flag the irregularity, then hesitated, deleted the note, and rewrote it as something far less alarming. Commander Vash did not like delays, and questioning the weapon 2 hours before deployment was not something Rin wanted his name attached to. "Status," Vash said over the comm. "Unit 12 is ready," Rin answered, and hated how easily the lie came out. Back on the surface, Nora reached the trading post just as old Samuel was helping unload crates from the supply ship. Samuel was the oldest person in Halden's Reach, a retired militia leader with a limp in his left leg and a habit of talking to Nora like she was already grown. He handed her a small crate of dried fruit to carry, more to keep her busy than because he needed the help. "Storm's coming tonight," Samuel said, glancing up at the sky. "Feel it in my knee before the weather reports even show it." Nora looked up too. The sky above Halden's Reach was clear and orange, with no sign of clouds. She did not know that what Samuel felt was not weather at all, but the pressure of a warship's engines cutting through the upper atmosphere, hidden behind a cloak of false readings. That evening, Daniel Bennett came home late from the power station, tired but smiling, and the family ate dinner together in their small dome house. Grace talked about a farmer who had cut his hand on a broken irrigation pipe. Daniel talked about a generator that finally stopped making a strange clicking noise after weeks of complaints. Nora mostly listened, picking at her food, thinking about the dried fruit crate and whether old Samuel would let her carry the next one too. None of them noticed the faint shimmer high in the darkening sky, a streak of light moving too smoothly to be a falling star. The Dominion had staged it carefully, designed to look exactly like a meteor entering the atmosphere, the kind of accident that would never be traced back to an empire that always denied everything. Inside the falling shape, folded tightly to survive the descent, Unit 12 waited in silence, its rewired mind already beginning to stir at the faint scent of a settlement below, full of warmth and breath and the small, quick heartbeats of a great many frightened things waiting to be found. The bell at old Samuel's trading post did not ring again that night. Something else was coming instead, and Halden's Reach had no idea it was already too late to prepare. Grace Bennett was washing dishes when the light outside turned white, then orange, then a color that did not belong in any normal sky. A sound followed a few seconds later, a deep rolling boom that rattled the windows and knocked a cup off the shelf. She dropped the plate she was holding and ran for the door, already shouting Nora's name, though Nora was sitting right there at the table, frozen with wide eyes. Across the colony, alarms began to wail from the central tower, the same alarms that had only ever been tested, never used. People spilled out of their homes in half-buttoned jackets, some carrying children, some carrying nothing at all of them looking toward the eastern ridge where a trail of black smoke rose into the darkening sky. It looked, to anyone watching, exactly like a meteor strike. It looked like bad luck. It did not look like an attack, which was precisely the point. Daniel Bennett grabbed his emergency radio and pushed his family toward the underground shelter beneath the trading post, the same shelter old Samuel had built years ago and insisted on maintaining even when others called it a waste of space. Samuel was already there, ushering neighbors down the stairs with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this kind of thing before, even if the circumstances were completely new to him. Get down, he said, over and over, his old militia training taking over instantly. Nora held her mother's hand tightly as they moved through the crowd, but the crowd was thick and frightened, and hands slip easily when everyone is trying to move in different directions at once. A group of running men shoved past them. Someone screamed about fire near the greenhouses, and for just a moment, Grace's grip loosened. That moment was enough. When Grace turned back, Nora was gone, swallowed into the moving mass of bodies heading toward the shelter. Grace screamed her daughter's name, but her voice was lost under the alarms and the shouting and the second boom that rolled across the colony, closer than the first. Nora did not mean to get lost. One moment she was holding her mother's hand, and the next she was being pushed sideways by strangers, spun around twice, and suddenly facing the wrong direction entirely. She was small, and in a crowd of panicking adults, small people get pushed to the edges. She stumbled into a side alley between two storage buildings, away from the noise, away from the crowd, away from anyone who might have noticed a child slipping out of sight. She called for her mother. No one answered. The alarms kept wailing, distant now, and the ground shook once more beneath her feet. Nora did what her father had taught her to do if she ever got separated in a crowd. Find shelter, stay still, wait to be found. She remembered a maintenance tunnel nearby, one her father had shown her once while checking on a cable line, low and narrow but dry and out of the wind. She crawled inside and sat with her knees pulled to her chest, listening to the chaos outside grow louder, then quieter, then louder again in a way that made no sense. She did not know that something enormous had landed less than half a mile from where she sat. Unit 12 emerged from the smoking crater exactly as it had been trained to. It moved low at first, wings tucked, scenting the air thick with fear, and fear was everywhere in Halden's Reach that night. It tore through a supply fence without slowing down, sent two guard drones crashing into the dirt with a single swipe of its tail, and let out a sound that was not quite a roar, more like a long tearing shriek that made every living thing within a mile want to run. People ran. That was the plan working exactly as intended. Commander Vash, watching the feed from orbit through Unit 12's tracking implant, allowed himself something close to satisfaction. Below him, on the surface, Dr. Wren watched the same feed with a knot in his stomach that had nothing to do with satisfaction at all. Unit 12 moved through the colony in long, low strides, chasing the scent of fear wherever it was strongest, and for a while, that scent led it nowhere in particular. Then, cutting through the general panic of the crowd, it caught something different. Not the sharp, jagged fear of adults trying to save themselves, but a smaller, quieter kind, coming from somewhere underground, near a row of storage buildings at the edge of the colony. It followed the scent into the alley, then to the narrow mouth of the maintenance tunnel, and lowered its massive head to look inside. Nora saw two eyes catch the light first, each one larger than her whole head, glowing faintly gold in the dark. Then she saw the shape behind them, scales like burnt iron, a jaw lined with teeth long enough to end everything in a single motion. She should have screamed. Every instinct in a normal child would have screamed. Instead, Nora went very still, the way she did when she was watching something she did not understand yet, something she wanted to look at a little longer before deciding what to feel about it. The dragon's breath rolled over her in a hot, heavy wave, smelling of ash and hot metal. Its jaws opened wider, closing the last small gap of tunnel between them. Then it stopped. Its whole massive body went rigid, muscles locked mid-motion, head frozen inches from the small, unmoving girl in front of it. Somewhere in its rewired brain, something that had never once misfired in 9 years of conditioning suddenly, inexplicably, did. Unit 12 did not know what to do with a creature that was afraid of nothing at all. The tunnel was too small for the dragon to fully enter, so it stayed half in and half out, its enormous head filling the narrow space in front of Nora like a wall of scale and heat. She could feel its breath against her hair, warm and smelling faintly of hot metal. Anyone watching from a distance would have said the child had only seconds left. Nora did not seem to know that, or did not seem to care. "You're hurting," she said. Her voice came out small in the tunnel, but steady. She was not talking to comfort herself. She was talking the way she talked to injured birds she sometimes found near the greenhouse fence, the ones that flinched away from every hand except the one that finally stayed still long enough for them to understand it meant no harm. The dragon did not move. Its golden eyes, each one larger than Nora's whole body, stayed fixed on her face. Up close, past the teeth and the size and the ash-colored scales, Nora noticed something she had not expected to notice. Thin, pale lines crossed over its snout and along the base of its neck. Old scars healed over roughly, the kind of marks that came from things done to a creature rather than things it had chosen for itself. She had seen scars like that before, on a mining dog old Samuel once brought back from a bad accident at the North Shaft. That dog had bitten at first, at everyone, until it learned that not every hand reaching toward it wanted to hurt it. Nora reached out one small hand, slowly, the way her father had taught her to move around the colony's work animals. She did not touch the dragon. She simply held her hand out, palm up, and waited. Deep inside Unit 12's mind, something that had been built through 9 years of careful, deliberate conditioning strained against itself for the first time. It had been shaped to associate fear with reward, trained on thousands of hours of frightened creatures running, screaming, begging. It had never once been shown this. A small, still creature, radiating none of the panic it had been built to chase, offering an open hand instead of a fleeing back. The trigger that should have ended everything in an instant did not fire. Instead, something older and less understood stirred in its place, some deeper instinct buried underneath the conditioning that Dr. Wren had never fully mapped, something closer to the animal Unit 12 had been grown from before the Dominion rebuilt its mind into a weapon. The great head lowered further, until its snout was almost touching Nora's outstretched palm. Then, very slowly, it pressed against her hand, the way the mining dog had once pressed its head into Nora's lap after finally learning to trust her. Nora smiled, the way children smile at things that make sense to them even when adults would say they should not. Outside the tunnel, the sounds of chaos had not stopped. Militia teams were forming up near the central square, guided by old Samuel's shouted instructions, preparing to move toward the crater where the creature had first appeared. None of them yet knew it had already moved on, or where. That changed a few minutes later, when a militia scout rounded the corner of the storage buildings and found the mouth of the maintenance tunnel blocked by a wall of iron-colored scale, wings folded protectively around the opening like a shield. The scout froze, weapon half raised, waiting for the killing strike that never came. Instead, a small voice came from somewhere behind the dragon's folded wing. "Don't shoot him," Nora called out. He's not doing anything. The scout did not lower his weapon immediately. Word had already spread that the creature had torn through fences and knocked out guard drones without slowing down. It made no sense that the same creature was now curled protectively around a missing child instead of harming her. He called it in over the radio anyway, because it was the truth, and because he did not know what else to do. The message reached Grace Bennett before it reached anyone else, relayed through a shaking militia dispatcher who did not fully believe what he was repeating. Grace ran the whole way, Daniel close behind her, both of them expecting the worst despite what the message said, because messages were sometimes wrong and hope was sometimes a lie people told themselves to survive the walk. What they found instead, when they reached the alley, was their daughter sitting calmly against the tunnel wall, one small hand resting against the massive, scarred snout of a creature large enough to crush their entire house. Its golden eyes half closed, as if the touch of a child's hand was the first gentle thing it had ever known. Grace's first instinct was to grab Nora and run. Her second instinct, the one that stopped her before she moved, was the realization that the creature had positioned its own body between her daughter and the tunnel entrance, facing outward, wings spread wide, guarding rather than hunting. Nora, Daniel said carefully, keeping his voice as calm as he could manage. Come here slowly, okay? Nora looked up at her parents, then back at the dragon, whose head turned to follow her gaze, watching the two new humans with cautious, careful attention rather than aggression. He's not bad, Nora said simply. He was just told to be scary. He doesn't want to be anymore. No one in that alley, not Grace, not Daniel, not the militia scouts still standing frozen a few steps away, understood exactly what had happened inside the creature's mind in the moments before they arrived. They only understood what they could see with their own eyes. A weapon built to end their colony in a single terrifying night, curled instead around their daughter like something choosing, for the first time in its engineered life, to protect rather than destroy. High above the planet, Commander Vash stared at his tracking screen in silence, watching Unit 12 status readouts scroll numbers that made no sense at all. Commander Vash read the same line of data 7 times before he allowed himself to believe it. Unit 12's threat engagement counter, the number that tracked every time the creature moved to kill, had not increased once since it entered the human settlement. Its proximity readings showed it standing motionless beside a single small human for the last 11 minutes, close enough to end her 100 times over, and it had done nothing at all. Explain this, Vash said, his voice flat in the way that officers under him had learned to fear more than shouting. Dr. Rin stood beside the display, arms folded tightly across his chest, trying to look calmer than he felt. He had known something was wrong days ago, buried in readings he had chosen not to report. Now that choice sat heavily on him, because a weapon behaving strangely was a problem he could have quietly fixed before deployment. A weapon refusing its purpose in front of Commander Vash was something else entirely. There may have been an error in the conditioning sequence, Rin said carefully. Some irregular response to non-fleeing targets. I flagged early signs of it, but the deployment schedule did not allow time to. You flagged it, Vash repeated, and deployed it anyway. Rin said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not make things worse. Vash turned back to the screen, watching the frozen image of Unit 12 standing guard over a human child instead of destroying her. 9 years of budget, 9 years of careful breeding and conditioning. The single most expensive weapon in his personal arsenal, and it was currently behaving like an oversized guard dog for the very species it had been built to terrify. Send a retrieval team, Vash said. If it cannot complete its function, it will be destroyed and the operation will proceed with soldiers instead. I will not have this recorded as a failure. Down on the surface, word of what had happened at the maintenance tunnel spread through Halden's reach faster than any official announcement could have managed. By the time the sun rose the next morning, half the colony had already heard some version of the story, and most of those versions did not match at all. Some said the creature had been tamed by magic. Some said the girl had somehow controlled its mind. A few, mostly the younger militia members, said it was simply broken and dangerous and needed to be destroyed before it changed its mind again. Old Samuel walked to the Bennett house that morning, leaning on his cane more than usual, and found Daniel and Grace sitting outside on the porch steps, watching the creature curled in their small yard like an enormous, scarred dog, with Nora sitting against its side reading a book out loud to it, as though it understood every word. "That's not something you see twice in a lifetime," Samuel said, lowering himself carefully onto the step beside them. "We don't know what it is," Grace admitted. "We don't know if it's safe, if it's going to change back to whatever it was before, if the people who sent it are going to want it back." "They'll want it back," Samuel said. "Weapons that expensive don't get abandoned quietly." He was right. Within 2 days, colony sensors that had never detected anything unusual before began picking up faint energy signatures moving through the upper atmosphere, patterns too controlled to be natural weather, too quiet to be another meteor. Daniel recognized the signal shape from old defense training records he had studied years ago, back before he became an engineer instead of a soldier. It was a scout craft, mapping the colony from a distance, watching, waiting. The creature noticed it too, before any human instrument confirmed it. It lifted its head from where it had been resting near Nora's ears, if they could be called that, angling toward the sky, a low sound building in its chest that was nothing like the tearing shriek from its first night in the colony. This sound was lower, steadier, closer to a warning growl than an attack cry. "He knows they're coming," Nora said quietly, closing her book. Dr. Wren arrived on the surface 2 days later, officially as part of a retrieval team sent to reclaim or destroy Unit 12, unofficially because he needed to see with his own eyes what he could not explain from orbit. He came without weapons drawn, which surprised the militia guards who intercepted him at the edge of the colony, and asked only to see the creature, not to take it. What he found, standing at a cautious distance from the Bennett house, was a version of Unit 12 he did not recognize from any of his design records. Its posture was relaxed instead of coiled for violence. Its eyes tracked Nora's movements with something close to attentiveness rather than predatory focus. When she walked closer to it, it lowered its head to meet her instead of rising to loom over her. "It was never supposed to be capable of this," Wren said, almost to himself. "Maybe it was," Samuel said, standing nearby with his arms crossed. "Maybe you just never gave it the chance before." Wren did not have a good answer to that. He had spent 9 years teaching a living creature that fear was the only currency worth understanding. And in less than a week, an 8-year-old girl who was not afraid of anything had taught it something else entirely, something that had apparently been buried underneath the conditioning the whole time, waiting. That evening, as the scout craft's signal grew stronger overhead, Wren made a choice he had been circling for 2 days without admitting it to himself. He requested a private channel back to the ship, not to report the retrieval mission's progress, but to request something else entirely, permission to study Unit 12 on the surface, in its current state, before any decision was made about destroying it. Commander Vash denied the request within minutes. The order that followed was simple and absolute. A full strike team would be sent down within 48 hours, not to retrieve the weapon, but to eliminate it, the child it had bonded with, and any colonists who resisted the operation. Failure would be erased quietly and completely, the way the Dominion always erased its mistakes. Wren stood alone on the colony's edge that night, staring up at the darkening sky, and understood that he had exactly 2 days to decide which side of this he was actually on. Rain fell over Halden's Reach the night the strike team arrived, a thin, cold rain that turned the streets to mud and made every sound carry farther than it should. Nobody in the colony had slept properly in 2 days. Dr. Wren's warning, delivered quietly to old Samuel through a borrowed radio channel and then passed on to the rest of the colony leadership, had given them exactly enough time to prepare and not nearly enough time to feel ready. Daniel Bennett spent those 2 days doing what he did best, taking the colony's ordinary equipment and turning it into something it was never designed to be. Mining drills became short-range defenses. Cargo loaders were rewired to move barricades faster than any human crew could manage alone. He worked alongside old Samuel, who dusted off militia plans that had not been needed in years, and together they turned Halden's Reach from a mining colony into something that could, at the very least, make an attacking force work for every step it took. The creature stayed close to Nora through all of it, watching the preparations with the same steady attention it gave everything now. It had not shown aggression toward a single human since the tunnel, but its size and strength were impossible to ignore, and Daniel found himself, more than once, wondering what it would do if the fighting actually reached his daughter. He got his answer sooner than he expected. The strike team came down in 3 transport pods, landing just beyond the colony's northern fence under cover of the storm. They moved fast and efficiently, trained soldiers who expected to face frightened miners and outdated weapons, nothing more. What they found instead was a colony that had spent 2 days quietly preparing for exactly this moment. Barricades reinforced, defenders positioned with more discipline than their scans had predicted. And standing at the center of the northern approach, wings spread wide against the rain, was Unit 12. The Dominion soldiers hesitated at the sight of their own weapons standing against them, uncertain whether their equipment had somehow misread the situation. That hesitation cost them precious seconds. The creature moved first, faster than anything that large should have been able to move, sweeping through the first wave of soldiers not with the wild, tearing violence it had once been trained for, but with a controlled, almost careful strength, knocking weapons aside, driving bodies back rather than ending them outright. It was not fighting the way Dr. Rin had built it to fight. It was fighting the way something fights when it has finally chosen what it is protecting. Nora watched from the doorway of the trading post, where Grace had insisted she shelter despite Nora's protests, and saw the creature turn its body again and again to keep itself between the advancing soldiers and the buildings behind it, buildings full of families she had known her whole life. "He's protecting everyone," she said quietly. "Not just me." Grace did not answer. She was too busy helping carry the wounded back from the fence line, where human defenders fought alongside a weapon that refused, again and again, to be what it was built to be. Commander Vash watched the battle unfold from orbit with mounting disbelief, watching his strike teams advance slow, then stall completely, held back by a combination of stubborn human resistance and his own weapon fighting against his forces instead of alongside them. He ordered a second wave down, then a third, unwilling to accept that a single mining colony and one malfunctioning creature could hold against trained Dominion soldiers. Dr. Rin, still on the surface, watched the battle from a position near the Bennett house, no longer pretending to himself that he was simply observing. He had spent 2 days quietly gathering everything he could, records of Unit 12's original conditioning data, internal Dominion communications about the operation, proof of exactly how the strike had been planned and why. He had told himself he was documenting a scientific anomaly. He knew now that he had actually been building a case. The battle reached its worst point just before dawn, when a fourth wave of soldiers broke through the eastern barricade, closer to the colony's center than any previous group had managed. Old Samuel led the defense personally, his old militia training carrying him further than his aging body should have allowed, but even he knew the line would not hold much longer against fresh Dominion forces. That was when Unit 12 did something Dr. Rin had never seen it do in 9 years of study. It let out a sound, low and resonant, carrying across the entire battlefield, and every remaining defender near the eastern line felt the ground itself seem to answer. The creature tore across the colony in seconds, placing itself directly in the soldiers' path, and this time it did not hold back the way it had with the earlier waves. It fought with everything it had, not out of conditioning, not out of programming, but because somewhere in the last week, in a maintenance tunnel and a small yard and 2 days of watching a family that had never once tried to hurt it, it had decided exactly what it was willing to fight for. The fourth wave broke and retreated before the sun fully rose. Commander Vash, watching casualty numbers climb far beyond anything he had projected, and knowing that Dominion Command would soon start asking uncomfortable questions about an operation meant to require no real fighting at all, gave the order to withdraw the remaining forces. It was not a decision born of mercy. It was a decision born of arithmetic, and the arithmetic no longer favored him. As the last transport pod lifted away from Halden's reach in the gray morning light, Dr. Rin stood near the fence line, watching the retreat with the stolen records held tightly against his chest, and made the final decision he had been avoiding for 2 full days. He was not getting back on that ship. Morning light came slowly through the smoke still hanging over the northern fence line, and for the first time in 2 days, no alarms were sounding across Halden's reach. People moved through the streets checking on neighbors, clearing debris, counting the damage, all of them still half expecting the transport pods to return before the sun finished rising. They did not return. Dr. Rin walked into the colony's main square that morning with his hands raised and a case of data drives clutched against his chest, and he was met by a line of exhausted, wary defenders who had every reason not to trust him. Old Samuel was the one who finally lowered his weapon first, recognizing something in the scientist's face that looked less like an enemy and more like a man who had run out of places to hide from what he had built. "I have proof," Rin said, before anyone could decide what to do with him. "Everything. The conditioning records, the deployment orders, internal communications proving this operation was designed to look like an accident. Proof that could end Vash's career and expose the entire program to galactic oversight, if it reaches the right hands before the Dominion buries it." It took most of the day for the colony leadership to decide whether to trust him, and it was Nora, of all people, who tipped the balance. She had spent the morning sitting beside the exhausted, wounded creature that had fought through the entire night to protect her home, and she looked up at Dr. Rin with the same steady, unafraid attention she gave everything. "He made Warden," she said, "but Warden doesn't hate him. Not really. He's just sad." Nobody in the square had an easy answer for that, but it was enough to convince Grace and Daniel to let Rin stay, at least long enough to prove his claims. Over the following weeks, with the colony's communication array repaired and reconnected to wider trade routes, Rin's records made their way into the hands of a neutral trade coalition that had been watching Dominion expansion with growing suspicion for years. The recordings of an unprovoked bioweapon deployment against a small, undefended mining colony were exactly the kind of evidence such coalitions had long wanted and rarely managed to obtain. Commander Vash, facing an inquiry he had never expected to survive, found his career quietly and permanently ended, the Dominion moving swiftly to distance itself from an operation that had become impossible to deny once the evidence went public. Halden's Reach, once an obscure mining colony nobody outside the sector had heard of, became something else entirely, a symbol held up by coalition diplomats as proof of exactly the kind of quiet aggression the Dominion had been getting away with for years. None of that mattered much to Nora, who mostly cared that Warden was allowed to stay. The creature never returned to whatever it had been before that first night, the trained, conditioned weapon built to chase fear across a battlefield. Whatever had broken loose inside its mind in that maintenance tunnel stayed broken loose, and over the following months, the colony slowly stopped seeing it as a monster that happened to be gentle and started simply seeing it as Warden, the enormous, scarred creature that slept curled around the Bennett family's porch and let the youngest colony children climb carefully onto its back during quiet afternoons. Dr. Rin stayed in Halden's Reach too, in the end, unable to return to a Dominion that would have executed him for treason and unwilling to leave the one place where he had finally seen his life's work become something other than a weapon. He spent his days studying Warden's altered mind, not to rebuild its conditioning, but to understand it, filling notebooks with observations that had nothing to do with fear responses and everything to do with trust, memory, and the strange, unplanned capacity for loyalty that had apparently been buried under years of careful engineering the whole time. "You never built a monster," Samuel told him once, watching Warden nap in the afternoon sun with Nora asleep against its side. "You built something that was waiting for someone to be kind to it first." Word of what had happened at Halden's Reach spread slowly across trade routes and settlement networks over the following year, told and retold with small changes each time, but always keeping the same core detail intact. An empire had sent its most expensive weapon to terrify a defenseless colony into surrender, and a single unafraid child had somehow turned that weapon into a protector instead. Other species along the frontier, wary of the Dominion's long history of quiet conquest, found something oddly reassuring in the story, proof that even the Empire's most carefully engineered tools were not entirely beyond changing sides. Humans, meanwhile, found themselves the subject of a question that spread almost as widely as the story itself, whispered among diplomats and traders who had spent decades assuming humanity's greatest strength was its stubbornness or its adaptability. The real question, the one nobody in the wider galaxy had a clean answer for, was simpler and stranger than that. What kind of species raised children who could look into the eyes of something built entirely to destroy them, and respond not with panic, but with an open hand? On quiet evenings, long after the story had become something other colonies told their own children as they fell asleep, Nora still sat on the porch with Warden's massive head resting in her lap. reading books out loud the way she always had, as if none of it had ever been anything more remarkable than a girl and her closest friend, watching the sun go down together over a colony that had learned, in the space of one terrifying night, exactly what it meant to be protected by something the galaxy had expected to fear instead.